Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. I'm Robin Sullivan from the Leather Elves, and I have to say that last shot of all that wonderful birch was just incredible. I was like, I need to find that stand of birch and cut it down, but make sure that there's still enough to go around and leave it beautiful. So I hope you're all doing well. Hi, Julie. Hope you're doing well. So I've got the usual intros and reminders. Please like the Leather Elves on Facebook to get notifications of when we go live. You can check our Facebook page for surprise sales, pop-up events. You can follow the Leather Elves on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel, please. That would be wonderful. It's so exciting when I see the numbers go up. So if you could do all those things, that would make me smile. But you guys make me smile being here anyway. So tonight, I have a big smile because there's someone on tonight who I'm very excited to have here. This young man is an amazing aviculturist, and I've had the pleasure of meeting him in person, and I wanted to have him share his experiences and his knowledge with you. So it is my pleasure to welcome Greg Sercel to our show tonight. Hey, Greg, how's it going?
Hey there, doing wonderfully over here.
Excellent. So yeah, we're doing the bi-coastal thing tonight. Greg's over on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast, and we managed to get our times together. This is a beautiful thing. So, all right, I need to introduce Greg to you guys. This is a pretty impressive bio. Greg Sercel's passion for aviculture began at 8 years old. Yep, you guys heard me. When he successfully hatched grocery store chicken eggs. And we're going to talk more about that, Greg. I need to hear that story. Over the following years, Greg began breeding quail to supply local pet stores, then gradually began raising other birds such as finches, doves, and conures. As Greg's passion for aviculture grew, he began raising Australian parakeets, lorikeets, and small softbills. Greg founded Greg's Aviaries, which specializes in raising a variety of birds from lorikeets to finches, and he supplies birds to pet owners, stores, and zoos alike. That's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, all right, we need to hear that story. How did you that you wanted to hatch grocery store chicken eggs?
Most definitely. So I was about 8 years old at the time, and it was sort of a family experiment where we wanted to try hatching out grocery store chicken eggs as a school science project. So, of course, with the help of my family, we ordered a cheap styrofoam incubator, got some eggs from Trader Joe's, our local supermarket, put them in, and sure enough, I believe out of the initial dozen, four of them were fertile and three of them hatched. So we ended up with a flock of backyard chickens and had fresh eggs every morning.
Not, it's so funny that, first of all, really cool to hear that your family was in support of this as a science fair project. And so, all of you would be breeders out there, or would be aviculturists, get that family support because it makes a difference. But then, just so amazing that you went through that process and were able to have that kind of success. That's pretty cool. So after that, you started doing quail and things like that for local pet stores, and then it just grew from there.
It did, yeah. So I started out with Coturnex quail, then started raising some other small quail, zebra finches, and about that time, I actually met another aviculturist who really took me under his wing and showed me the scale of aviculture and introduced me to the Avicultural Society of America. That was Steve Duncan, and I actually met him through family. So he has family that went to school with some of my family, and that's how we ended up meeting. He gave me a tour of his aviary, showed me the ropes, and kind of went from there.
So I'm sure you have realized this by now, but what an amazing first connection in aviculture Steve is. I mean, Steve Duncan is, when we talk about the greats, Steve does come to mind. Let's be honest. And the fact that he was the first person, or one of the first people that took you under their wing, pun intended, um, is just incredible. So very cool. Shout out to Steve for putting you on the right track. So um, so if you had to pick a bird, what's your favorite bird to work with?
I would say just about any species of lorikeet. They're, in my mind, hard to beat. Just in personality, in their temperament in the aviary, they're just absolutely fascinating.
And they're quiet, right?
I would say they're probably one of the louder parrots. They kind of nonstop chatter, but the sound is pretty, so that counts for something.
And clean. How would you feel about that? So, because I know there are a lot of people out there going, "Oh no, 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 lorikeets are super messy." What would you tell them?
Yeah, it really depends on how you set them up. If you put them in your living room, then it would be most definitely a very messy bird to keep. But if you keep them outside in a properly set up aviary where you can hose down the aviary to wash off all of the dirt that builds up on the wire, then they're probably one of the cleaner birds you could keep. There's no waste that falls under the aviary that would attract rodents and things of that nature.
They are. I mean, they're spectacular to look at. So, how many species of lorikeets do you work with?
At the moment, about 14.
Nice, very nice. And do you house them all separately, or are they? Tell folks who are listening a little bit about lorikeets, if you don't mind.
Yeah, definitely. So lorikeets are a type of nectar-eating parrot from Australia and Indonesia. So they eat an entirely liquid diet, which makes them a bit of a unique parrot. But the thing about them is, if you keep them, like I said, indoors, they make quite a bit of mess because everything is liquid. But outdoors, it becomes very easy because it all washes into the ground. But I house everybody in individual pairs. So they're all set up pair by pair per flight. And then young birds I flock in a colony setting until they get to be about a couple months old. Then I separate them because they can be fairly aggressive.
Okay. So, in reading your bio, you went from, the chickens to then finches, doves, and conures. How did you decide you wanted to raise lorikeets?
To be honest, it was just more or less trial and I shouldn't say trial and error, but it was a situation of working with different birds and kind of getting to know their husbandry and their care and their personalities. And from there, I realized lorikeets just absolutely uh, they they were just the bird that I loved. That was the one that I decided I wanted to go and set up pairs of and breed and specialize in.
It's so neat to see that smile on your I can see you can see the passion and like the joy that you get out of it. And that's really cool to see in someone who's doing this, as part of the industry. It's not just, oh, it's a little hobby. It's, um gotta get the mesh taken care of, right? I love that for
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
So so you were around 8 when you decided you were gonna hatch these chickens or try to hatch these chickens. So when did you decide this was it for you? This is what you wanted to do?
To be honest, I'm not entirely sure, but I just gradually got more and more interested in birds over the following years. And I would say in the last 3 or 4 years is when I really went for it and started building aviaries, building pairs, and uh, going all in with basically any spare time that I had working with birds.
Nice, very nice. And it's kind of it's addictive, right? I mean, we talk about,
Truly.
oh, I'm just gonna have a couple and I'll set up a couple pair, and then suddenly it's all consuming. Um, so what are we looking at here? What's this picture?
Ah, that's a Stella's lorikeet, and it's eating a bit of bottle brush. So, as far as enrichment goes, I take a lot of branches and flowers off of various local aviary safe trees, and I put them in the flights at least a couple of times a week. So it provides something for the birds to interact with, to chew on. They get a little bit of nutrition out of it, and it keeps them excited and it keeps them stimulated.
Nice. And what kind of lorikeet is this?
That's another Stella's lorikeet.
Is it? It's they're I just find them stunning to look at. They're really visually appealing, which to me, my thing is enrichment, training and enrichment. And so for me, because they are so visually stimulating just for us, that I would go that route too with the enrichment a little bit. If I had a pet lorikeet, I would try to kind of, make things that were visually appealing so that, they had something that was interesting to them. But I think, doing the fresh browse and the branches and things like that is just amazing. A lot of people forget that, it's right in our backyards for some of us, that you can just go out and make sure that it's, you're cutting in a safe place, with no pesticides or stuff like that. And then giving that to our birds can be, it's like, oh, well, it's just a branch, but it's so much more than that. So
Exactly. It's what they use as enrichment in the wild.
yeah, yep. And that's the thing, Greg, that when for the years, and it's a lot of years that I've been teaching about enrichment, um, one of the things I always tell people is think about what they do in the wild. And so from someone who is an aviculturist, that's got to be really important for you. What kind of behavior would they be exhibiting? Because it seems like that would encourage more breeding. Am I right?
Absolutely. So thinking about what they're doing in the wild, what they're eating in the wild is very important. And creating situations in which they can forage, say for flowers, it definitely helps with breeding. So something that I've actually found in setting up pairs of lories is if you put two birds in a cage, sometimes they're like people. They take time to get to know each other. Sometimes it's love at first sight. Sometimes it's most definitely a little bit more painstaking and difficult. But putting in items like browse, flowers, things of that nature, they go and they eat it, and it becomes a community activity where the birds get close to each other and work with each other in some cases when they're eating.
Hmm. That's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And the first time I saw it wasn't with um, birds, it was with bats. I was doing enrichment with bats, and we gave them a foraging puzzle to use, and we put fresh browse and flowers in it, and it was meant to be, used by just one bat. We were working with Malayan flying fox, and they came over and they approached it and from a group standpoint, and it was a community activity like you said, and they worked together to kind of slide it was a gravity feeder, and they slid the sleeve up. One held it while the other ones took the flowers out, and it was really kind of interesting to see that dynamic. And I'm sure, from an agricultural point of view, it's nice to see them, working together because, again, that's what they would be doing. So,
Absolutely.
but, so when you first started, so what was if you don't have to give us a dollar figure, but so your initial investment, what was that like?
The initial investment, I would say, was more or less a Craigslist chicken coop. Well, Craigslist children's playhouse that was converted into a chicken coop. So we took a children's playhouse and built a hen house out of it. Then from there, it became more or less just the time of learning to build different things and using scrap bits of lumber to build aviaries, cages. And from there, it really just grew. So, this is actually in this photo right here, my very first parrot type aviary, where really all it was a bungalow shack. I called it the Love Shack with breeding pairs of conures in it. So, from there, I ended up doing some renovations gradually, added on a couple of suspended flights, and I believe I have a photo of that in here somewhere. But really built that based on what I had seen at other aviculturists' facilities. And then from there, I was very fortunate to have some other aviculturists that were actually retiring from breeding parrot type birds that gifted me their suspended flights. So I ended up installing those, and this is right here the setup today. Suspended flights, and entirely different from what you saw in the first photo, but a lot more specialized for lories and parrot type birds.
Nice. And I think that's an important thing for people to think about is, it doesn't have to be that huge initial outlay. It can be, just let's get started with this. Let's give it a shot, and using what you have at your disposal. I mean, it sounds like you might have repurposed some stuff when you first started.
Absolutely. So uh, it became more specialized and setting up specialized equipment just for the birds after a while. But at first, it really was just retrofitting old bits of furniture or whatever I could to create
Mhm.
suitable situations for housing the birds.
Nice, very nice. So the setup's a little different now than it was. Um, so what was the research process like for you? I mean, I know you had some amazing mentors. Um, so tell us a little bit about that. So what kind of research did you do?
I would say the majority of it was in visiting aviaries, seeing how people had their birds set up, and learning little tidbits from each facility.
Mhm,
Everybody has their own tips and tricks that they develop through trial and error of different setups and how they worked. So being able to take that from other people and incorporate it into my own facility really helped. So in this
mhm,
photo, there's an automatic watering system that I have on all of my flights now, where Lories they're a bird where they really love to bathe, and having an open water feature helps with their husbandry quite a lot because if you go out and look at the aviary at any given time, there's a good chance you'll see some lories bathing. So it's an open water bowl, and what I did is I set up an automatic system that cleans it out and then refills it. And every week or so I go through and disinfect the bowls to make sure they're absolutely clean. But this takes some of the workload out because going through and having to clean out all those water bowls multiple times a day every single day would be quite a bit of painstaking manual work. So having something like that to help really takes down the time that it takes to care for all of the birds. And that's actually based off of another setup that I saw from another aviculturist.
but you created this on your own.
I did, but credit where it's due. I mean, the idea came from somebody who's been doing it for almost 40 years.
Uh, that's really cool, though. So do you mind sharing with us a little, like, how it works?
Yeah, so there's a little valve on the end right here, and what it is it's a quarter-inch strip line system which goes up to what is basically a sprinkler system. So 3 times a day, there's a valve that comes on with high pressure water that purges out the bowl, blows any debris out, and the water just goes down to the plants below the flights and waters them. And then after that, another valve which has a much lower flow rate comes on, and it just fills up all the bowls again with a bit of a trickle.
That is so cool. Joanna Roth says, "Working smarter, not harder." And it's true. I
Exactly.
mean, those little kinds of things can really be so helpful. And no, I think that's ingenious. I love it. And I think, anybody that's looking at, not necessarily a breeding aviary, but an outdoor aviary, that's something, that they could incorporate that would be really cool to have. Um, Sarah says you're quite the engineer. Nice. That's,
Uh, Thank
it,
you.
they say that, what is it? Invention, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that's, some people like in the industry, it's like, okay, how do I make this work? How do I make this a little bit easier? And I think that's, you've hit upon something that's wonderful right there. So good job. Um, what about, so there you go. That's a wonderful photo. This is such cross-generational conversation that's happening here. For those of you that don't know who that is with Greg in that picture, that is Lorella Desborough. Lorella is an amazing aviculturist, and this is the kind of sharing that needs to happen. Greg, you talk about having mentors, having people who have helped you along. And I think that's something really important for the bird community as a whole. Um, and, so you've had pretty decent experiences all along, like, along the way?
Absolutely. I couldn't stress it enough that having people who have helped me out and taken me under their wing has really given me all of the knowledge that I have now.
So, did you send these pictures to Nick? um, the so one of the things, we talk a lot about um, cooperation, and learning from other people, learning for it years and years, the community was a little bit tight-lipped. There's another one of the folks I'm sure you've learned things from
Oh,
in this.
absolutely.
So it's a matter of sharing that information. And I think, Greg, the fact that you're willing to tell us how that watering system works, and the fact that you're on with me tonight, I think it's really important for people to remember that we need to communicate in the bird world. You know, we need to pass on this information. We need to get people excited about it. And I think, this is just I can't tell you how excited I am for you that this really works well. Oh, look at that. So you guys who don't know who this is Sarah, and I know that Sarah Brabs, and I know that Greg and Sarah have worked very closely together. Am I right?
Yeah.
Uh,
So she's actually somebody who Steve Duncan has also taken under his wing and uh, really helped out in aviculture and, teaching and showing everything that he has to show with how the whole operation works. And so that's
yeah.
something that is really wonderful.
And I think, I got to tell you, your pictures here are like the who's who of aviculture, which is kind of exciting. So all right. So tell us a day in the life of Greg. What does that look like?
Definitely. So it's a lot of bird feeding. I would say it probably adds up to about 2, 3 hours a day during the breeding season. So between hand feeding, taking care of the entire aviary, coming back in, hand feeding again, uh, all of it, it adds up time wise, but I would say it's absolutely worth it.
Is it there you go. And it's, they always say, you've got to love what you do. And I think that you do. Am I right?
Absolutely. I look forward to
Good.
it.
So, as far as schedules are concerned, do you keep the birds to a very specific schedule?
I would say so, yeah. So everything is fairly on the clock. Hand feeding is something where you really don't want to miss a feeding. So
Right.
that's you know several times throughout the day the babies have to be fed, and the rest of the aviary, that's more of a once a day type thing. So going out, pulling all of the food bowls, disinfecting them, refilling them, washing the flights, and all of that. It doesn't have to be on such a tight schedule. It can be done basically anytime throughout the day. I like to have it done prior to lunchtime, but otherwise, I'd say it's fairly scheduled.
So, Nick, can you hold on this picture? So, Greg, I know this is another kind of, well, not time saver, but it helps with husbandry. Tell us about what's going on in this picture.
Absolutely. So on all of my flights, I have a misting system. And what that does is it allows another opportunity for the birds to bathe. And during the summer, when it's hot outside, it provides evaporative cooling. So the birds can fly under this cloud of mist. And if the temperature is, say, 100 degrees outside, it can be 20 degrees cooler in that cloud of mist. So it provides an opportunity for birds to go and stay out of the heat, which they definitely take advantage of. This is a hooded parakeet out the aviary, and he's sitting under the mister right there. And I try to have a perch under each one. But that's something that during the summer I'll run throughout the day. It's on another timer, so it's a 5 minute automatic valve where it cycles on, 5 minutes off.
Nice. So, while we're talking, while we've got this up there, what kind of perching do you use? Do you have uh, one that you like in particular, or that you would suggest that people use? Does it vary from species to species? How do you choose what perching you use?
It varies from species to species depending on their foot size, but I basically take tree branches off of, again, safe trees in the area, and I'll chop them into various sizes. So for any given birds, I like to give several different sizes of perch in their cage. So that helps with uh, avoiding requiring grooming, actually. So it keeps their beaks nice and trimmed down naturally. Same with their nails, and I just basically try to give as much variation as I can with that natural wood.
Okay. And are they all fixed, solidly fixed to the side of the cage, or is there some give in them? Because well, just I guess I'll let you answer that question.
Yeah, they're all solidly fixed to the cage, and I'll throw in smaller branches with the browse, which isn't fixed, and that can be thrown all over the cage, chewed up, and used however the birds would like. Sometimes they'll take it into the nesting box and use it to line the nest.
Okay, nice. Yeah. The reason I ask is I know I've used not for breeding purposes, but for enrichment purposes, uh, so that there's like on a swivel on the end. So if you take an eye bolt, put it in the end of each end of the perch, and then affix that to the side of the cage. So there's a little bit of give. So if they fly onto a branch, it's not always a solid landing. They've got, a variety of different things there, but um, I can see, if you're giving them browse, they could take it in, into the nest if that's where they're at that point in time. So very cool. And I noticed too, the branches are not, some of these birds are fairly small, but they're not on like teeny tiny branches.
Exactly. So there are teeny tiny branches in there. It's not really visible in this photo, but what I do is I try to give branches where they're larger and have smaller offshoots coming off so they can climb around on it and more or less do whatever they want. But the wider branches, it gives them more grip and it really helps them keep their nails nice and well worn.
hmm Very cool. Yeah, I like to use a variety of different, different trees and stuff like that, just so because it is different sizes, different textures, things like that. Um, so if you had to share with us your biggest success to date, because we know you're going to have a lot more, what would you say
Thank
your
you.
biggest, absolutely, what would you say your biggest success is?
I would say it's been the husbandry of the blue-crowned lorikeet. So that's a species that for quite some time I had wanted to work with, and unfortunately, there just aren't a lot of them out there in the United States. So obtaining pairs definitely was a difficult task, and then once I set some up, they're just an incredibly difficult species. They'll go nest and they'll lay eggs. The eggs won't be fertile, or they'll sit on the eggs, then hatch out the chicks and not feed the chicks. And there's about a million and one different things that I had to figure out in getting blue crown lorikeets to successfully breed. So that's something that was very, very exciting for me.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about them as a species, if you don't mind.
Yeah, definitely. It's probably one of the smaller species of lorikeet. They're a little bit smaller than a lovebird. The beak is smaller than that of a budgie, and it's kind of a stocky little parrot from some smaller South Pacific islands, like the Cook Islands.
hmm
And they've been in aviculture for quite some time, but they've never really been around in any big numbers. I believe the San Diego Zoo imported them back in the 1970s or the 1990s, and there have been a few private aviculturists that have maintained them. But getting them to breed reliably has definitely been a difficult task, and it's something that I'm still working on figuring out. So it's a species where I'm working with several other aviculturists on trading bloodlines and trying to build as many pairs as possible to keep them going for years to come.
Very nice. So what are their do you have any idea what their numbers look like in the wild?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I believe their populations are fairly stable where they are.
Good.
They're a large amount of their range is within wildlife refuges.
hmm And I mean, we don't see them a lot in the pet trade.
Yeah, there, as far as I'm aware, aren't any in the pet trade at the moment. So it
Yeah.
would be wonderful if at some point in time there are enough of them in numbers that they could be introduced to the pet trade. But I think
hmm
that may be a ways out.
Yeah. But they are stunning to see. I mean, so good luck with that. I think And that in itself is a lesson too, Greg, that, when we're talking to people about aviculture, that it's not just, okay, I'm putting two birds together and this is what's going to work. It takes a lot of observation and a lot of, trial and error, for lack of a better term. Not that anybody's getting hurt with the trial and error, but that's, I'm sure that you found that is the case.
Exactly. There's really no one right way of doing things. And, sometimes you have to try a number of different things to get birds to breed, and it can be anyone's guess what those things might be.
Mhm. And I think, it's important when we were talking about research before, it's important for people, whether they're breeding or just, keeping birds. And I always remind people that you're still an aviculturist if you're keeping birds, not necessarily breeding them. You're still considered an aviculturist. And I think one of the things, when we were talking about what they're doing in the wild, I think that's so important that let's be realistic. You're out on the West Coast, and it's a little bit lusher and greener there than it is in Maine. I love Maine, but it's not as lush outside. But we're probably never going to be able to exactly replicate their environment from the wild, but knowing what it is. Do you have, I mean, so I know you've talked to a lot of people, a lot of other aviculturists, and gotten information from them. Are there any reference materials that you might suggest for people, that they could look at or read up on, different species if they were going to just keeping them in their homes?
Absolutely. So there's a number of different bird clubs that have a bi-monthly publication. The American Federation of Aviculture has one called the Watchbird, and they have a database of all of the Watchbird magazines going all the way back to the beginning of when they were published. So if you get online, you can actually search by species through those journals. Same goes for the Avicultural Society of America. We also have a bulletin, and there are some really great books out there on keeping birds, both in the breeding context and just keeping them as pets. So
Nice,
one
very
book
nice.
that I really love is Tony Silva's Citiculture.
There you go. I know, and that can be a daunting book when you kind of look at it and go, "Oh my goodness, this is a lot to take in." But I think it's worth looking and going through. And the AFA and ASA are both amazing organizations. Next weekend is the AFA conference in Virginia. So if anybody's out that way, worth the trip. Um, but yeah, and I think what that comes back to too is, ASA, AFA, networking with people. And you mentioned, bird clubs and, things like that. Excuse me. Um, were you ever part of a local bird club?
Yeah, so there are actually a couple of local bird clubs in the area. One of them I just recently became a member of, which is North County Aviculturists down in San Diego. So I
Yeah.
believe they meet every month, and that's a really great bird club. There's another one, Orange County Bird Breeders, and they are also meeting every month. That unfortunately was stopped with COVID, but they started meeting again, which is wonderful.
All
So
right.
those bird clubs are really great places to form a local network with other aviculturists, not to mention local bird shows. If there are any shows with either showing canaries or bird marts, that's a great place to meet people.
There you go. So, and I think it's about that connection. We can try to kind of do things on our own, but there are people who have been there, clearly I've been doing this a lot more years than you have. Just yeah. But yeah, but talking to people who have done it longer or who have done it differently. And it doesn't even have to be someone who's done it for years and years and years. I mean, when we talk to you, Greg, the information that you've given us tonight is evidence that it doesn't have to be a, 40-year commitment. It's as long as you put your passion into it and your heart and soul, then you'll be successful. I think that's a really good message. Um, so you mentioned, for enrichment, you do browse. So can you tell people how they could, maybe offer that to their birds at home?
Yeah, so depending on what plants you have growing in your area, there are some really great online resources which provide lists of safe and toxic plants. So I would, of course, if it's not on your own property, get permission to take trimmings from that plant and make sure there aren't any pesticides or uh, topical fertilizers used on the foliage of those plants to make sure it's safe for the birds. And that said, just give it to the birds. That's really all it takes, and they'll make great use of it, chew it, eat it. They they really do great with natural enrichment items like that.
Yeah, I think, and I think it's just watching how they, for people at home, watching how they interact with it, and then so maybe you can't get fresh browse all the time. Like I said, maybe you live, someplace cooler where it's not always available. So how do you recreate that activity? Those kind of things are really helpful for people to do. And I mean, I would assume, Greg, that you spend a lot of time, or you have spent a lot of time just watching the birds and how they behave and what their reactions are. Am I right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've spent
So,
countless hours out in the yard just watching the birds and their behavior, and I think that's something that's key. Maybe not countless hours, but just observing their general demeanor and how they're interacting with their environment with each other. That says a lot about how they're doing.
mhm. Oh yeah, definitely. So diet. How do you I mean, again, we can't always replicate their diet. So how do you offer, and I know diet can be enriching as well. So how do you handle that?
So, of course, that depends on what the birds are and what they need dietarily. But in the case of the lories that I keep, I actually make my own Laurie nectar, and it's based off of the recipe of a very good friend of mine, Chris Touchton, and she formulated a recipe over the course of many years. And the initial formulation for that came from a series of analyses of the crop contents of wild lorikeets that you can find in the book Parrots of the World. So
No.
she used that initially as a bit of a resource to find out what to put in the Laurie nectar and went from there. So again, working off of the knowledge and years of work of other aviculturists, that's created a really great basis for what we can do now.
That's so cool, and we've got Jane listening, and Jane is in Australia, and she says they're spoiled with their choice of browse in Australia, and you're absolutely right, Jane. And also your birds that are just flying around wild. I'm just saying. I think we all wish we had cockatoos and king parrots and all kinds of cool birds just flying around in the park. Which it depends. If you, I guess if you live in Florida, that's a possibility, but. Um, what kind of as far as we talked about the feeding schedule with the babies, and then do things get changed up, like, so not necessarily the lorikeets, because that is an absolute, that's that nectar diet. What about the other birds, Greg? What kind of things do you feed? Oh, there we go.
Ah. So when it comes to things like soft bills, I do keep a few species of soft bills which eat primarily a fruit diet. So I'll change up the type of fruit that I'll offer them between a few different options, and I think that's a really great way of providing an enrichment. And I think the far more relatable case of seed eating parrots, because that's something that a lot of people keep, and there are a lot of different dietary solutions out there. There are pellets, there's dry seed diets, there are sprouts, there are all sorts of fresh food diets out there, and I try to provide a little bit of each. So I'll provide pellets to the birds, dry seed, sprouts, a bit of fruit here and there, and fresh greens when I can. But of course, that's a lot to do every day. So it's definitely important to keep in mind that this isn't stuff that has to be constantly offered to the birds every single day. It can be changed out and varied, and that's something that definitely helps the birds.
Mhm. I think that's such an important point for people to hear, is that it doesn't have to happen every single day. It's something that, you know, the diet doesn't a parrot in the wild diet doesn't change on a daily basis. It's usually, the flock goes here, feeds on what's available, and then moves on when that food source is kind of done. And it's seasonal, so there are a whole bunch of factors that go into that. And I think, changing it up offers some of that variety that they may be missing because they are in human care. So I think that's really a good, it's an important thing for people to hear. It's good. Um, so do you do any train? So I know that you sell to pet owners and to stores and to zoos. Do you do any training with the birds before they leave Greg's aviaries?
Yeah, a little bit. So with birds that are going to pet homes, once the babies are weaned, I like to do a little bit of step up training just to get them familiarized with perching and being around people, help them be a little less fearful of people. But that's about the extent of it.
Okay. So Adrian's asked, what would you suggest or recommend to young people interested in getting started in aviculture?
Ah, that's a wonderful question. I would definitely say, if possible, try to make it to local bird clubs and try to meet other aviculturists because they're an absolutely wonderful resource, and it would be really great getting other young people involved in aviculture. And I think there are a lot of aviculturists at those bird clubs that would absolutely love to help out young people.
Very good advice. I like it a lot. So we talked before, we went live, and we were talking about what would you advise a new parrot owner? And so in 50 minutes or less, no, in as long as you want to take, what kind of things would you tell a new parrot owner or someone new to aviculture?
Definitely. I think in either case, I would say, uh, first and foremost, it's important to do a little bit of research before getting started just to get a bit of an idea of what you're getting into. So that
Mhm.
definitely helps. Just getting an idea of what is required for keeping birds and the general care that they take. So being somewhat prepared in that aspect, being open minded and being open to advice from other aviculturists who've been doing things for many years, because there really is no one right way of keeping birds or breeding birds. There are a lot of different methods and a lot of different suggestions that people have. So being open to those and seeing what you can do to implement them into your own routine and into your own setup is a very important thing. Otherwise, I would say, patience with the birds. So it's
Mhm.
definitely something that does take a lot of time. And if you're new to getting into birds or say breeding birds, they aren't going to go and lay eggs and hatch out babies overnight. It definitely does take time. And being patient with them, monitoring what they're doing, and going by that to change your routine is a very big deal.
Nice. And so I don't know if you saw the comments section while you were saying that, and when you were talking about being open-minded and that there's not just one way to do it. The hearts and the likes were just flying up the screen because I think, that's you have you've said so many important things. Yeah, there's another who's who picture.
Ah, that's
But
a
you've
wonderful
said so many.
photo.
It is great. You want to tell people who that is?
Ah, yeah. So going right to left, that's Steve Duncan, Miguel Rocha, Daniel Shearing, and I. And that was at one of the ASA conferences. And I think this is just a wonderful photo to show the illustration of all the different people that you can meet and get to know and talk about birds with at these conferences.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key right there. Um, but I think it's really, a matter of, um, be Sarah took that picture. She'd like credit for that. Can we like throw her name on that, Nick, at some point in time? So
Oh,
we're
yeah.
giving Sarah credit for that last one. But I think, the being open-minded and the listening to others and not just rushing into things because yeah. Oh, wait, a little bit of money. Uh, no, there are no royalties for Sarah. But, or maybe he was talking about how much it would cost. Oh, there we go. So there's even more who's who in aviculture, and that's at an AFA conference, I believe. Um, so as far as the research end of things and people knowing what they're getting into. How about advice on the internet? What are you thinking?
I think there are a lot of good resources on the internet, and there's also a lot of bad resources on the internet. So it can be tough figuring out which is which. But that said, there are some really great sites which are very informative on bird keeping and bird husbandry, which I've definitely used. From everything from the age at which different birds reach sexual maturity to nesting box dimensions to you name it. There is just about everything you can think of out there.
Very cool. So Pat Burke, hi Pat. Pat wants to know if you're enjoying the linneys.
Absolutely. So that was a bird that I actually set up pairs of late last year. I believe my very first pair of linneys came from Pat. And that pair, by the way, has done wonderfully. I believe I've raised 6 babies from them this year. But that's a bird
Nice.
where I set them up and I wasn't really sure what I was going to make of them when I was first setting them up. I had heard mixed things about their temperament and how they would do uh, in my setup, and giving it a try was definitely worth it. They've become one of my absolute favorite birds, and I'm currently holding back and setting up a number of pairs.
Nice. Very nice. Um, all right. So open-mindedness is what I'm taking away from this. I think this is has been really cool talking to you. And as far as so where do you go from here, Greg? What's what's the next step?
To be honest, continuing what I've been doing with the birds as best I can, and I think slowly but surely expanding the collection. And one day I would absolutely love to build a much larger scale bird farm. And if I ever could, I would do birds full time. But I think that's definitely going to be um, something to be determined in the future.
There you go. But it's a possibility. So we never want to discount that. Um, as far as someone who wants to set up an aviary, if keep doing an aviary outside, not necessarily for breeding, but just an outdoor aviary. Words or of advice for people that are trying to set up an outdoor aviary. Any suggestions?
Yeah, well, spare babies, all of my birds are actually kept outside year round. So there are a few major things that I would take into consideration, but it's a really great way of keeping birds. So,
Mhm.
of those things, I would say the weather and the environment in which the birds are in, and predator control are two very large factors. So, being able to keep the birds happy in their aviary and keep predators out such that the birds aren't at risk from being harmed, that's a very big
Mhm.
thing. And then another thing is depending on where you are in the country and what sort of weather patterns you are experiencing in your area, that's a very big deal. So having an area where the birds can get exposure to the full weather, and then an area where the birds are sheltered from wind and rain, snow, things of
Mhm.
that nature. Uh, in some places, having a supplemental heat source. In a lot of areas, say in the Northeast or even in Europe, it gets to a temperature in the wintertime where there might be feet of snow on the ground and people still have their birds in semi-outdoor aviaries. There might be an indoor section and an outdoor section. So it really depends entirely on where you are, but those are the major considerations I would take into account.
One thing, Greg, that I think is a misconception that a lot of people have is that because a lot of our birds are tropical birds, that they have to be it has to be super hot, and they love that, and that's the way they need to be kept. Have you run into that with people?
I have. That definitely is a common misconception. And there are a few exceptions of some birds that are very temperature sensitive. But for the most part, I've actually found birds to be uh, more loving of the cold than of the heat. So when the birds are breeding, it's usually the beginning of the year, late winter, when there might be frost outside, even where I am. And the birds do wonderfully with that. So it's important to bear in mind that proper acclimation is key. If you have a bird that's been kept in a 75-degree room for its entire life, then just throwing it outside isn't going to work. It definitely has to be done at the right time of year to acclimate them. And they'll grow in thicker down in the wintertime to maintain their body temperature. but they do, for the most part, and again with a few exceptions, birds do really well in the weather.
Nice. And I think too, allowing them to be exposed to not just temperature differences, but things like, yeah, there you go, 90. Uh, but allowing them to be in rain sometimes I've seen birds that will just kind of get out on that perch that's not covered and just revel in the rain. I mean, hey, do you have some birds that enjoy the rain?
I definitely do. In fact, one of the birds that was shown earlier in some of those photos, the melanistic Stella lorikeet, that's a bird
Mm.
where even in the wild, they're found to be their population. They have a naturally occurring mutation. There's a red and a melanistic, and the melanistic is found at higher altitudes where it's much cooler in the wild. And I haven't had snow here personally, but I've been told they actually do really well when it's snowing outside. So that's
Huh.
an interesting case where, again, species specific, but they do really well in rainy, cold weather, and they
Yeah.
also really don't enjoy the heat. So, in on a hot day, they'll be under that misting system the entire day.
Yeah. Yeah, Pat says that friends in the Netherlands lost birds to the heat wave. So, I mean, the extremes are probably not something we want to expose them to, but yeah, it's definitely something to consider. And when you think about Kia, that the Kia are mountain birds, and they love the snow. They'll play in the snow, and and they're wonderfully intelligent. But so it does depend a little bit on where they're from, but they're also I find them to be very adaptive. That they will. It doesn't have to be. I've worked with people that have said, "Oh well, it needs to be this particular degree all the time in the bird room," or not necessarily. So Julie's asked, can you speak to some differences in personality between the different Lorikeets?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say all of the lorikeets are just incredibly hyper birds. They eat a high sugar diet and they always act like they're on a sugar high. So they're very interesting in that respect, very spunky. I would say a lot of the rainbow lories definitely have a very calm temperament, and they can actually be kept in colony settings. So a lot of people, when they first see lories, are in aquariums and zoos. They'll have these lorikeet forests where you can go in and offer nectar to the birds in little cups. So in that respect, those are definitely of a much more mild temperament to some of the larger ones. Say the loriest lories like chatterings, black caps, yellow bibs. They can be far more aggressive. A lot of the other ones, say the chalcopsidas, Dovian bodes, yellow streaks. If you keep more than one pair in any aviary together, regardless of how big, they can be absolutely murderous. I think down in the right hand corner, there's a black cap. They're a bird of that nature as well. So it's
Mhm.
definitely important to bear in mind what they will and won't get along with. They can be absolutely fine for years, and then one day they might just snap like the flip of a switch and decide they absolutely hate any other bird.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that's sometimes we get the wrong impression when we go to those like lorry walkthroughs at zoos and things that, oh, you can just throw a whole bunch of lorries and lorikeets together and it's all great and life is good. And you do have to be aware of those kind of things. So that is an important word of caution. So I, Greg, is there anything else you want to tell us about aviculture, your passion for birds, um, before we go?
Let's see. I'm sure I could think of enough to go on for the rest of the afternoon with that, but as a whole, I would just say people who are keeping birds, it's such a wonderful community, and the more we can work with each other on these birds, the better, because it's part of what makes it all worthwhile. Being able to share the successes and the experience and the knowledge of what we do.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, and I'm sure you hear this a lot. Um, when I first met you, I was very excited because I was like, this is a younger person who's really passionate and excited about aviculture. And since then, I have seen you just do incredible things. network with amazing people, and you have kind of renewed my faith in the fact that aviculture will go on. So I want to thank you for that. I think that's really, and I bet a lot of people who are listening feel the same way. So thank you very much for what you're doing. And
Thank you. That's
you
very
know,
kind of you to say.
oh, it's very true. So if you guys want to get in touch with Greg, I know Greg has a Facebook page, and you're setting up a website, right?
I am. I do have a website that I'll be putting up soon. I've got a Facebook page, Greg's Aviaries, and then my personal page, Greg Sercel.
All right. So reach out to Greg and tell him how awesome he is, because he is. So I want to thank everybody who listened tonight. And you're right, Sarah. That's exactly what he is. He's the future of aviculture. And it's very, very exciting to see. So um, if you have somebody in the bird world that you really want to hear from, let me know. And we will, do our best to have them on as a guest, and we can have Greg back again. We'll talk more about Lorikeets. Oh, thank you, Nick, for reminding me. I know Dorothy's on tonight. The Bird Endowment is having the Blues Bash Saturday night at AFA. So make sure that you attend that if you're going. If you are not going, you can check out the items on sale for the silent auction. There's a QR code right there on the screen that you can check out, and there's a lot of information there. So make sure you stop by and see Dorothy and the Bird Endowment crew. It'll be a good time, I'm sure. Next weekend is AFA. It's happening in Virginia, so on the East Coast, yay. And very doable for a lot of people here on the East Coast. Make sure you get out there if you can. And I think, if you've got anything, like I said, we're going to have a roving reporter at AFA. So look for that person if you're there, and and see if we can get some point of view. There is a virtual Zoom. Adrian, thanks for the reminder. There's a virtual Zoom on AFA. If you can't be there in person, that is available to purchase. So Adrian, I'm assuming people just need to go to the AFA website, and there'll be information on that. So you can get all that information. If you can't make it, you can still get all the information. All right. Well, thank you guys again. Thank you, Greg. And get back to work out in those aviaries, will you? So
Thank you. Thank you
we
for
need that.
having me on here.
All right. You take care. Everybody take care. I will see you next week. I hope it's a good one. I hope you're inspired to do incredible things with your birds. Night, everybody. Take care.